Have you ever dreamt of buying a wine country home on a few acres with views of vineyards and total privacy? In this video, I'll talk about whether the dream actually lives up to the reality. If you live in San Francisco or the Bay Area, you need to be prepared for rural living if you currently live in an urban or suburban setting. While some people absolutely love the idea, the practicalities can quickly take the shine off their vision of wine country living. In this video, I'll share some of the realities of rural living. For example, do you mind taking your own garbage half a mile down the road to the garbage pickup point every week? Or how would you feel about seeing a rattlesnake by your pool? And what about a 40-minute trip to pick up a loaf of bread? Now, without doubt, there are so many positive things about living in a rural home in wine country, but you'll have a very different experience compared to living in downtown. My wife and I thought we wanted to live the rural life. We were even going to build our dream home until fires came onto the edge of our property 2 years running. We then decided to move from Alexander Valley to downtown Healdsburg, which we absolutely love. However, there are definitely aspects of rural living which I'd like to experience and which I wonder if I'm missing out on. But which one is right for you? That's what I set out to answer in this video, so let's get started. So if you don't know me, my name is David Hargreaves, founder of Living Sonoma. In just 3 years, I've become a top agent here in Healdsburg, doing over $40 million in business a year and helping over 50 people from the Bay Area just like you. But you don't care about me, so let's talk about Healdsburg and the pros and cons of living rural or city life in downtown Healdsburg and why I switched from one to the other. Please give this video a thumbs up if you like it and subscribe to get more videos like this. Imagine picturing a dream rural property. What would it look like? A beautiful home with indoor-outdoor living, a resort-style pool, guest house, views of vineyards, all set up a few acres up a sweeping driveway from the valley floor. Certainly sounds pretty cool. For many people, this checks a lot of the boxes. Views, vineyards, pool, privacy, and surrounded by nature. But what's it really like owning a rural property in Dry Creek Valley or Alexander Valley? If you're seriously thinking about the wine country good life, here are 8 things you need to think about compared to living in downtown. Number 1, what's it actually like living surrounded by vineyards? It's easy to forget, but growing grapes, it's farming. It's dirty, it's dusty, it's noisy. Did you know grapes are actually picked in the middle of the night? So if you live in the middle of a vineyard, you will get woken up by farmers spraying the vines or harvesting the grapes. And if the tractors don't wake you up, the huge fans used for frost protection almost certainly will. Vineyards look pretty, but they do need a lot of attention from the farmers. Now, if your home is set in 5 to 10 acres, it takes a lot of looking after. Unless you want to spend every waking hour tending to the land, you're going to want to get someone to look after it for you. If it's a second home, you're definitely going to want someone to help you manage the property on an ongoing basis. A rural property is not the sort of thing you can lock up and leave for a month if you aren't able to come up and visit for a month or so. So number 2, are you concerned about fires? It's a question I get asked an awful lot. Like it or not, a rural property is likely to be more susceptible to fires, especially if you're on an elevated position with views. Unfortunately, fires run uphill, not downhill. That being said, if your rural dream home is in the middle of a vineyard, then vineyards are among the best fire breaks, so that will almost certainly be safer. If you live in town, you are closer to fire services, close to fire hydrants, and there's a high population density. So the fire service is always going to prioritize saving a house in town versus a single house set up on a ridge. Regardless of where your property is, I don't think you'll have to worry about your personal safety as long as you pay attention to any instructions to evacuate. Over the past few years, evacuation protocols have improved so much. The worst case scenario now, certainly in my view, is that you lose your house, but at least you will be safe. I know that's not great, but personal safety has to be the most important thing. So number 3, how do you feel about not being on city services? The moment you leave city limits, you'll be on a well and septic system, which is both positive and negative. The good news is that if you're on a well, your water's free, or rather, all you pay for is the electricity to pump the water out of the ground. If you live in the downtown, then the city has the ability to restrict the amount of water you use. If you have a septic system, then at its most basic level, you just need to be careful what you put down the toilet. At another level, it may cause additional complications if you want to add additional bedrooms to the property. If you live in rural Healdsburg, you'll be on PG&E, whereas if you live in the city of Healdsburg, you'll be on Healdsurg Electric, which is awesome. Because it has its own electricity utility company, in Healdsburg you're much less likely to lose power due to a power shutoff that has become such a common practice with PG&E. And finally, garbage, or rubbish as Brits say. If you have a winding drive, garbage trucks will not go up the driveway to your home to collect your garbage. If you live up a single track, you will have to haul all of your garbage down the road to the main road where it will be picked up. That's why so many rural properties have a gator. That being said, if you don't want to haul your garbage yourself, there are lots of people who will often take it to the end of the driveway once a week. Number 4, what if you need a loaf of bread? I know it's a pretty obvious thing to say, but if you live in a rural home, you are more likely to be a lot further away from the grocery store, bars, restaurants. It just means you have to plan ahead. I know my wife and I have got into a terrible habit now we live in downtown of going to the grocery store every day compared to doing a weekly shop. You definitely don't want to be doing a weekly shop if you live in a rural property. And if you do live in a rural home, you're less likely to head into town for, a bite to eat, to go for a drink. So you're much more likely to end up cooking at home, which is great if you love cooking and certainly are organised about your shopping. So number 5, what about having a hobby vineyard? I've got a number of clients who are passionate about learning all about growing and farming grapes and have always wanted to own a small vineyard. I've got other clients who like the idea of a vineyard, but more for the aesthetic versus, wanting to become a farmer themselves. And it's really important to be clear about your motivation for owning a vineyard. It can become incredibly expensive landscaping. And if you do purchase a home with a small hobby vineyard, say 5 acres or less, it's not big enough to be taken seriously by a big vineyard management company, but it is still possible to have it managed by a third party. And there are two typical models. The first one is you find a small vineyard manager who you pay to manage the vineyard. You make the decisions on how to best farm it and to get the best possible return. And you pay all the expenses. And, once the grapes are harvested, you sell the grapes to a winery and you take the profits or losses. The second model is you find a winery to take over the vineyard and they're responsible for managing it. They pay all of the expenses and then they take the grapes once they're harvested. You will often get a token payment in kind of maybe a few cases of wine. Number 6. Do you want to meet people or do you just want peace and quiet? I'm sure you want a little bit of both. When I first moved to Healdsburg, it was noticeable that living in town made it a lot easier to meet people compared to some of our friends who moved up here and lived in more rural properties. If you live in a gated property, you're just a lot less likely to bump into your neighbour. Of course you will, you'll meet your neighbours. But if you live in town and you walk to the plaza every day, the town's small enough that you will bump into people it happens the whole time. Some people like that, whereas other people like the fact that they can live in their own private bubble. But you need to decide, what it is that you're looking for about moving and living in Healdsburg. So number 7, what about the critters? You don't get many rattlesnakes in San Francisco, that's for sure, but you will see them if you have a country property up in Sonoma County. I've definitely had clients who freak out about the idea of seeing a skunk or a rattlesnake, but it will happen. If you don't like anything bigger than a spider, a rural property probably isn't for you. You will see mice, rats, bats, coyote, deer, raccoons, skunk, you name it. That being said, I live in downtown and I've seen a rat walking across the top of our fence and even a possum, which I must say gave me a shock for the first time when I saw one. And finally, number 8, do you want to feel like you live in a resort? For some people, having a home in wine country, it's all about having an escape that feels like its very own resort with a pool and a bocce court. It's clearly a lot easier to find a property that lends itself to that lifestyle out of town. It's not that you can't have that house in town, but those properties with the space for a resort style pool, they're just few and far between. And not to mention, they are pretty pricey. One thing is for sure, if you do have a resort style property, neither you or your guests are likely to want to leave it very often. So let's talk about money. How much do you have to spend? There is no question a rural property will likely end up costing you more, or rather you have many more options for cheaper properties in downtown compared to equivalent price properties that are rural properties. To buy a 1,500 square foot property in Dry Creek Valley on an acre, will easily cost you $2 million plus, unless it's a major project. In downtown, you can get a very nice home at an equivalent price point. Do you still like the idea of your dream rural property, or do you find yourself wanting some of the benefits of a downtown property but in a rural setting? This is definitely a common dilemma. Only you can decide, but hopefully this has helped you think about some of the pros and cons of rural versus downtown living. If you enjoyed this video, you might like my video about living in Healdsburg. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.